evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the Office for Alumni Relations and Annual Giving, and myself, I would like to thank you for spending this evening with us on discussing issues around US compliance with international humanitarian law. Before I go ahead and introduce each one of you briefly, I would like to say a few words in regards to how did I come up with this idea of putting together such event. Well, I originally became interested in international humanitarian law before I even stepped foot in the United States. Compliance, human rights, and democracy have different nuances when you're living abroad and you're looking from outside in. However, after moving into the United States permanently and getting an education on international criminal justice and later on human rights, a newfounded interest began to form. And that was the study of the war on terror. How did human rights, compliance, and democracy look now, looking from inside out? Therefore, we also spend a lot of time during my master's in human rights discussing the United States compliance with international humanitarian law and the relationship between the ICC and the United States. And I became passionate about the issue. So I said, why not put in a virtual room experts in the field and experts to be in the field. Without any further ado, I would like to start saying a few words about each one of you. Ms. Tatiana Scantler-Berry, she is a proud alumni of John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She recently earned her Master's of Arts in Human Rights. She now serves as the Associate Director of the National VISTA program at Hunger Free America, which is a nonprofit that aims to end hunger and poverty in the United States. She's an advocate of women's rights and women empowerment and involved with women issues internationally and domestically. And she helps her local community as an enthusiastic participant in Know Your Rights initiatives in the Bronx County. Thank you, Tatiana, for joining us this afternoon. We have Peter Metz. He is a recent graduate from John Jay College with a Master of Arts in International Crime and Justice, and also an advanced certificate in transnational organized crime. During 2016-2017, Peter helped conduct a project involving HIV-infected homeless populations who use synthetic marijuana, also locally known as K2, and the findings of such project were published in the current Pharmaceutical Biotechnology Journal. He has a specific research interest in organized crime and human trafficking. Thank you, Peter, for spending this afternoon with us. Professor Charlotte Walker-Said, she is the director of the Human Rights Program at John Jay. She's also an assistant professor in the Department of Africana Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She has graduated with a PhD in history from Yale University and has published many articles internationally in many journals, such as Gender and History, French Politics, Culture and Society, and many other ones. Last but not least, Professor George Andriopoulos. He is a professor of political science at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and at the Graduate Center. Also the founding director of the Center for International Human Rights at John Jay College. Before coming to CUNY, Professor Andriopoulos had taught for many years at Yale University. He has extensively written on international organizations, international human rights, and international humanitarian law issues. Thank you for Professor Andreopoulos for being here today. Without any further ado, I would like to continue our conversation with a few questions. Professor Andreopoulos, I will start with you. The ICC, as the only permanent international criminal tribunal with a mandate to investigate and prosecute international crimes of the genocide and crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression, is the pillar of the ICJ and human rights majors at John Jay. As we know, the United States and the ICC relationship has either progressed or regressed, depending on the administration in charge during the years. What can you say about the ongoing relationship between the United States and the ICC, and where do you see the country going with this?
How many days do I have?
Well, Professor, we can make a part 2 of the event, but we'll start with today.
Yeah, okay. What about just 5 minutes or so? Is that, what is the time frame?
About
2 minutes per person?
Yeah, I think about 2 minutes per person, 2, 3.
Okay, 2 minutes. Wow. Okay, this is a long story. It has been a very troubled relation that at best can be described as a roller coaster ride. The United States was one of the countries in the early to mid 90s that was very supportive with the idea of the International Criminal Court. However, during the negotiations for their own statute, objected strongly to some of the provisions that some states that were very sympathetic to basically strengthening the international rule of law and making the International Criminal Court a more robust institution. The US objected to certain provisions that were supported by states as well as by human rights organizations that did tremendous work leading up to the conference in Rome, as well as during the conference in Rome. The US objected, among other things, to the court having jurisdiction to nationals of state parties that were not members of the ICC, in case, for example, they committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide on their soil. They objected, among other things, to having a pretty independent prosecutor. They did not do that. Somebody who could initiate prosecutions on their, on their own initiative. And they also objected of having the crime of aggression included as one of these, which they felt should be only the purview of the Security Council. And that, of course, would have provided an opportunity for the US to block any action, because if one permanent member of the Security Council vetoes a resolution, it will not pass. As a result, the United States did not sign their own statute, but it was signed by the Clinton administration as it was leaving office, and therefore it dropped the hot potato on the Bush administration, which proceeded to the very unusual diplomatic move of unsigning their own statute. This is kind of unusual because usually states, if they do not want to proceed with the document that they have signed, what they do is that they refrain from ratifying it, okay? So that basically going through the process that would make it legally valid for them. And the US could have chosen that action. Instead, it chose the action to even withdraw its original signature. And of course, that ushered into a rather turbulent era, which, however, had some interesting side stories. The US did allow 2 cases to go to the Security Council and through the Security Council to be referred to the International Criminal Court, which therefore raised the issue, if you feel that this particular organ does not have legitimacy, on what grounds did you allow other countries' cases to go before the court, but you decide to exempt yourself from the court's jurisdiction. During the Obama administration, the temperature was lower a bit, but still the Obama administration refused to join the court. The things took a turn to the worst under the Trump administration, especially after the current prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda decided to request that the court there be given permission to start a preliminary, to start an investigation of the situation in Afghanistan that would have rendered all forces that were fighting in Afghanistan liable to possible prosecution in cases that they have committed international crime, meaning the US forces, the Taliban forces, the forces of the government of Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, when she requested initially that, the pretrial chamber refused to give her authorization. Then the case went before the appeals chamber of the ICC, which gave the authorization. That, of course, infuriated the Trump administration and imposed sanctions on ICC officials, including the prosecutor, which, at least to the best of my knowledge, it is the first time that an entity imposed sanctions on officials of an international organization. That was quite unprecedented. Of course, that is not the only issue that irritates the United States. What it irritates also is the fact that there is an investigation going on about what is happening in the occupied territories by Israel forces. So the two big problems that the US has is the investigation in Afghanistan and the investigation in Israel. The current administration, thankfully, at least tried to introduce some sanity to this whole relation by revoking the sanctions that were imposed by the Trump administration. That happened last Friday. Secretary of State Blinken said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, that although we continue to be troubled by the ICC's continuing investigation of the situation in Israel and Afghanistan, we do not believe that the most useful way to proceed is by keeping these sanctions, but by engagement with the ICC process, with the member states to try to address this issue. So that's where we stand at the moment, that there is an attempt at least to re-engage somehow with the ICC and participate as an observer at member states meaning member states with the ICC statute meetings. What is the future? Difficult to say, but I think that it is becoming increasingly difficult for the United States to keep making arguments seeking to delegitimize the ICC. The ICC is here to stay, and sooner or later, I trust that there will be some more serious effort to engage with the ICC and the member state with the possibility of becoming a member. I do not think that this is going to happen in the near future, but I cannot see how this can continue this situation, especially if the US continues to not stand in the way of referring through the Security Council other countries' cases to the ICC. I have much more to say, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And while you were explaining all of this, I can't help but have a follow-up question, which is really short. If you were to give your most educated guess in regards to, is this always going to be an issue of whoever comes into administration? Is the answer yes?
Well, let's put it this way. Administrations that claim, as the Biden administration has claimed, that it wants to re-engage with the international community, if that is the frame within which these interactions are going to continue, then yes, I can easily see some progress in this direction. If, however, let's say in the next electoral cycle, we again have a situation in which we have in the White House individuals and an administration that adopts, let's say again, an America first strategy, we are going to go back, and I do not think we are going to see any productive or constructive exchange between the institution and the United States. So basically, that's what I would say. Depends what is the approach of the administration, whichever is administration, with the rest of the world. If it is an approach that says we need to engage with international institutions, of course, realizing that every administration will try to protect US interests as they see fit, but at least comes with this approach that there is something that these institutions can offer, then I can see some progress. If there is an administration with a mentality that engaging with international institutions is a waste of time, then there is not going to be any progress.
Thank you. Professor Charlotte, a question for you. In international and domestic legal framework class, which is HR 702, students spend almost half of the class time during the whole semester centralizing the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discriminations Against Women, also known as the CEDAW, which is by far the world's primary legal document on women's equality. The US, as we know, has not yet ratified this document. However, different administrations have taken different positions on the matter. But it hasn't, so to say, no movement from any administration hasn't been significantly important to move the needle. Where do you see us going with this issue?
So I think that right now, the Biden administration has a lot of progressive energy behind it. It has a lot of progressive energy, especially on, I think, a lot of sort of social welfare benefit policies that are sort of anti-poverty, that are a little bit trying to roll back some of those Clinton era welfare reforms that we now know were really punishing to the poor, trying to roll back some of those minimum sentencing reforms that we also know are punishing to the poor. So there's been a lot of bipartisan energy, even during the Trump administration, on sentencing reform, on a sort of, reversal of mass incarceration policies. So I see a lot of movement, continuing in dealing with, social welfare, dealing with, sentencing and mass incarceration, and then moving into immigration. So I see a lot of energy. I mean, the Biden administration has already issued a number of executive actions or reversals of Trump's executive actions on immigration. And so we see, significant changes in immigration policy. Now, this doesn't leave a lot of energy for passing something like the ratification of CEDAW, right? The Convention Against the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So while I think this administration has a ton of progressive energy, and certainly I think made strides in gender rights just by having Kamala Harris be a vice president, we know some of these symbolic victories are sometimes just symbolic. They don't really move the needle for the nation. There was some progress there. I don't see a ton of policy initiatives aimed specifically at complying with international law with regard to gender rights. I think there's a little bit more energy behind what you might call sex and gender rights, or moving towards what you might call LGBT rights or LGBTQI rights, and having, the real victory at the Supreme Court over the summer. That was sort of a big victory for non-discrimination in federal law. So the recognition of no discrimination on the basis of sex recognized in federal law was huge over the summer. So we've already sort of made sort of sex and gender rights and anti-discrimination part of our federal law, just in terms of our jurisprudence. So that, Supreme Court decision affirmed no discrimination on the basis of sex or sexuality, right? Not just sex, but sex and sexuality. So between the Supreme Court decision and energy is moving in, again, like kind of domestic policy related to poverty and incarceration, environment, and immigration, I don't see a lot of energy behind ratification of humanitarian law or human rights law related to gender. I think it's almost dépassé in the sense that the discussion nationally or domestically about gender rights has moved a little bit more towards sex and gender rights. So sexuality, transgender rights, the push to have non-binary people be recognized on, all forms of identification, like, credit cards or driver's licenses or passports or things like that. So I think the women's equality discussion, or just looking at gender, male, female, kind of binary gender equality, is almost a little bit, almost like a little bit like a dépassé discussion. I think we're really seeing the progressive left pushing the discussion a lot tougher in the direction of LGBTQI rights, more than I see just looking at binary gender rights.
Makes total sense. Thank you, Professor. Peter, as a recent graduate in the International Crime Justice major, and to the best of my knowledge, you're in excellent standing as well. How do core and elective classes together intersect when you're looking at the job market search? Is the international knowledge that you get in the degree being applied at all? And well, that being said, as we progressively stand for making the program better for the future generations to come at John Jay, do you think that less electives and more internship placement would serve as a better plan?
Thank you, Jenny, for the question. I think it's a very good question. So there's not one way to answer it, but I'd like to say that the core courses and electives, they provide students with a general overview on the nature of this and the scope of international and transnational crimes. And they also show how different criminal justice agencies across the globe function to prevent and control crime and punish offenders and the violators of human rights. I personally have found it challenging to apply what I've learned inside the classroom on human rights to the real world. First, I want to point out that despite my success in the ICJ program in John Jay and beyond, there are few jobs for students with the ICJ degree, alumni as well. I think that the program in itself delivers a rich curriculum, and it could prepare students better for the job market. And as an ICJ MA student, I didn't really have a guidance or a right direction where to seek positions or to apply for jobs after I finished my degree recently. And much of my knowledge actually on the job market was gained from conversations that I had with former graduate students who are currently working in the field. I would also recommend that the ICJ faculty connect the current students of ICJ program with the alumni, so we can network on our own and prepare and ready ourselves for the job market. I'll also recommend that faculty work with students and expose us to the current jobs in the field, because our faculty does a lot of research, is always up to date. They get a lot of networking opportunities, more than students, I would say, of course. And I think that would be a good way to go. And also the guidance that would come from the alumni and the professors would kind of ease the students' fear and uncertainty around entering the real world post-graduation, because there's always the anxiety that comes with it for everyone. And also, I want to also share that in the process of looking for different jobs, I've applied for multiple positions with different agencies and federal agencies. And I don't really see like the international aspect being in it, but I'm sure they value the degree. And I'll also advise for the ICJ students to prioritize and capitalize on their languages when they have the multiple languages, when they speak different languages, because a lot of people and alumni of the ICJ They do speak different languages like myself, so I think they would be good, and I think they would make their chances higher when they speak multiple languages, so they can capitalize on the strength when applying for different positions.
Agreed, Peter. Tatiana, I have been happy and honored to share the journey of being graduates of the Human Rights Program with you at John Jay. And now you are working hands-on with a nonprofit whose mission is to end domestic hunger. How present is the international aspect and the international knowledge that we get present in your work, if it is at all?
Yeah, sure. So I first want to say thank you for having me on this panel, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion. And like you mentioned, yes, I work at Hunger for America, and we do work to end hunger through a combination of advocacy work and also direct service. And this is at the national level and also within New York City. So that's currently where I'm based. So we do continue to be a national leader in regards to hunger and poverty and social justice. And also particularly within my department, we sponsor the Anti-Hunger Corps program, which is a year-long program that places national service participants with partner organizations across the country to expand their services and reach more people in the need of food. And this is through AmeriCorps. So our VISTA members, they work on the front lines of hunger at our partner organizations across the country, and they're helping build capacity of food pantries, soup kitchens, and other advocacy groups by recruiting volunteers and conducting research. And this is also by supporting benefit outreach, so that looks like SNAP and WIC programs that we have here in the US. So I do believe that there is the guiding principle of the international framework of the United Nations, but this is more so within the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. And this is basically just acknowledging SDG 1, which is no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, and then definitely SDG 17, which is partnership for the goals. And we see that through our local impact, where we have the VISTA members partnered with our partner organizations that are focusing on ending hunger within their particular areas and in their states. So many of our VISTAs, once they graduate out of our program, their passions do align with these more international frameworks and the global goals. And they do find themselves within fulfilling roles within their service in a regional capacity. And we do see also that they're either working within another nonprofit or a governmental sector and continuing, or either going back to school and continuing their interest in food policy related issues in education and in that way. But I do feel that there should be more of a push within like the organizations themselves, more on a grassroots level, to utilize these languages around international frameworks, which I don't see as much. And it may look a little bit different as far as what the language is, how it's being said or portrayed, and it may not be being used exactly from these international frameworks. So there should be more of a push on that. But yes, it's happening, but in a progressive way.
I applaud your mission and your work, and that what you just said, it's sort of a leading following up question for all of you. In both programs, the ICJ and the human rights, the international aspect that puts the US versus all the international treaties that we have either signed and ignored, signed and unsigned. So everything that puts US in a relationship with the international treaties, communities, so on and so forth, is a big chunk of the curriculum. However, after the alumni graduate from John Jay, either with their bachelor's or master's, the international elements in the domestic job market, it's not quite present / required. unless you decide to pursue an academic career, meaning you go for your PhD and then sky's the limit. That being said, I want to hear a little bit from Professor George and Professor Charlotte Maney, who are currently in John Jay faculty. What's the vision of making these two programs better, to work better? And I am aware that CUNY students and John Jay students that graduate in ICJ and human rights are not the only students in New York City who are open to these opportunities. There's many other universities. But what can we do as faculty, and what can we do as alumni who are jumpstarting our careers into making the program more accessible and incorporating more elements that are related to the domestic job market?
I would say like just be, I think all of our students are already pretty aware of each administrative policy vehicle. I think that people, again, I don't agree with these people, but people who were really successful during the Trump administration understood Trump's policies that were, the whole platform of that administration was immigration. And so people who were anti-immigration just got into that administration and got really aggressive about what they wanted to do with that. I think the Biden administration is, again, going to be about immigration, about undoing a lot of the Trump administration's immigration reform, trying to pass actual new laws. That'll be really difficult, but just trying to sort of get a grip on what should a progressive immigration policy look like. We haven't really had any new laws regarding immigration for several administrations. DACA is just sort of one of many policy pillars. Will we have amnesty? What will we do with undocumented? Will we have the continuation of building a border wall? All of these policy issues are things that our students should be aware of, because no matter what is going on in human rights, American domestic policy is still really, really important for what's going on with human rights internationally. And I think that's always going to be the case. The United States has an outsized influence with its domestic policy on determining the outcomes of a lot of international policies. And so I think if the Biden administration can actually manage to get some foreign policy done in Central America, right? That's what Kamala Harris is doing right now, trying to work with Central America, trying to understand, what is it about Central America that is causing such a massive exodus of unaccompanied minors, of women, of young men? What is going on in Central America? So having a foreign policy that is domestically focused would at least be a shift away from the Trump administration, which just basically was all domestic policy and had no foreign policy focus whatsoever. So I think that anyone in human rights has to understand domestic policy first, what's going on with regard to domestic policies of a presidential administration and of course a state legislature, what is going on in the state, and then how does that affect a potential international foreign policy with regard to human rights. I think that if you're interested in a specific hotspot, like if you're interested in Yemen or Syria or Lebanon or the Rohingya or India and Bangladesh and Burma, if you're interested in those places, then you get to be an expert. I think building your expertise is the most critical thing for your MA period. Even if it's a narrow focus, just become an expert in that narrow focus and make that your cover letter, make that your interview. Just be like, I'm an expert on this thing. So I think expertise is actually really lacking on the job market. Everyone's sort of like vaguely aware of human rights or vaguely aware of some sort of policies, but there are very few true experts. So make yourself an expert, even if it's something really specific. I tell one of my students who was like interested in NYCHA reform, which is the New York City Housing Authority. I was like, you better become an expert in that. If you want to work in that, you become an expert. Where are the housing? What is the issue? What is the crimes? Is it domestic violence? Is it, formerly incarcerated? Like, what are the issues of NYCHA? What is hampering or hindering reform to NYCHA? Who controls NYCHA? Is it the city or is it the state? Is it Albany or is it Manhattan? What's going on? So I told her, like, if you really want to, be more involved in this, if you want to have a job here, you just have to be like the NYCHA psycho, like just know everything there is to know about these policies. And I think that's the best thing you can do is make yourself an expert and just, really be confident about your expertise. Again, And if it's really narrow, it's okay. Like you can apply that to other things, to other areas of housing reform. You can apply housing reform to incarceration reform. You can apply incarceration reform to social justice reform. You can apply a specific expertise to something else. You know, if you have it, your expertise will always be useful, even if it seems narrow. So I tell our students, like, really hone your expertise. It's never going to harm you to read a lot about it, to, you know, get all the news about it. And Twitter, for me, is a real easy digest. I just do all the Twitter hashtags or all the Twitters related to a specific subset idea, and just try and get that Twitter digest every, you know, once a week sometimes, just to get what's current in that subfield. So Twitter can be really helpful for like helping you understand what's going on in a specific subfield, whether it's Yemen or New York City Housing Authority or whatever.
Thank you for this question. Several points I would like to make. First of all, nowadays, and I speak from experience, having run several internship programs in the past, it is kind of important to have some kind of an internship experience before you go out to the job market. And, there are a lot of faculty at John Jay that do have their individual contacts, either with international organizations, different UN agencies, for example, or with organizations that are doing civil rights, civil liberties work, or human rights work. And here I want to say something about the semantics. One of the things I say to students when they come to my classes is that don't think that human rights is something that should be used beyond the country's borders, and civil and political rights is the discourse domestically. No, because the US has signed and ratified certain instruments that are not confined to civil and political rights issues. And when we talk about some of the issues that plague in some of these very serious issues that still have not, this country has not addressed satisfactorily, like the issue of healthcare, that the issue of homelessness and so on and so forth. These are human rights issues. And there are some very interesting grassroots organizations in New York and in other places that are trying to do work on these issues. So the language of human rights is relevant domestically. It's not only when we go to Uganda, to Liberia, to Georgia, or to Cameroon. The other thing that it is important to remember is that we are in a city which is the center in many ways of the universe. Every serious international organization either is located here or it has a liaison office here. The same with major non-governmental organizations. One of the things that many of us have been saying to the administration and successive John Jay administration, and I hope that this is being recorded, by the way, and goes up to the 6th floor, is that in addition to the individual connections that faculty has, the university, the college must adopt a more structured approach in building partnership with these institutions. That is, there are other universities in the New York area that, guess what? They have arrangements with major NGOs, UN agencies that earmark a certain percentage of internship for their graduate, of course, provided that they meet certain qualifications. At John Jay, we have to do that individually as faculty members, that there is no approach, there is no institutional approach to this issue. And this is something that I never understood. Not only me, several other faculty members have been harping about this with successive administrations, that it is kind of important. For example, let's organize a meeting at John Jay in which we invite representatives of some key UN agencies, UNHCR, Office of the High Commissioners for Human Rights, whether they are based here or in Geneva, they have a liaison office here. Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and I can go on, to indicate what are some of the programs that we offer, to hear what they are interested in, what kind of expertise, what kind of knowledge they need from students of ours in order to provide them with internship opportunities, meet some of our students, meet some of our faculties, start a conversation, and try to engage in a more systematic and structured approach. The same with some major non-governmental organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Human Rights First, and so on and so forth, rather than having students depend only on the individual context of the faculty. So we definitely need an institutional approach. And being in New York City, we are ideally located and situated, and we have a lot of expertise within our faculty. We have some very promising students that are dying to do work both domestically and internationally. The organizations are here. What we need is a strategy. And I think this is extremely, extremely important. And just one other thing, just as a little footnote, even for instruments that the US has not ratified, because earlier there was a question that we asked of Charlotte about CEDAW. As you know, the United States has not ratified CEDAW, and we don't know when it will. However, there are certain local communities in the United States that have passed ordinances that are consistent with provisions of CEDAW, in a sense, trying to bring international law home at a lower level, and they are grassroots organizations that are working in these communities in order to be able to implement ordinances that are consistent with international human rights instruments that this country has not ratified. So there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of things, but we need, in addition to the individual initiative of faculty and student, a more organized, systematic approach to these issues on the part of our institution. This is lacking, and this is something that needs to be addressed. We have the human power on the faculty level, the staff level, the student level to be able to do this. And always, I believe, when there is a will, there is a way.
I couldn't agree more, Professor George. And while you were mentioning the institutional approach, I couldn't help but remember a while ago a meeting with Mr. Louis Charbonnet, who was the director. I'm not sure if he is still, but he was the United Nations director at Human Rights Watch. But however, as you said, all of these initiatives are being taken on a me as a faculty, me as a professor level. And we also know that that approach can and is problematic because it interferes with what we call nowadays academic freedom. It depends on the faculty member, who are these resources being available to. Is it John Jay students that meet the requirement? Is it any race elements added to it? Is it any background elements added to it? So it's wrong in many ways. And I couldn't agree more that we do need an institutional approach into tackling this issue better. However, I can say that I am committed in upraising this issue more and more. So we can only work to make things better and not only hope. I saw in the Q&A there was a question for Peter that at this time I think we might have answered it, but however, question for Peter. Do you think John Jay needs more internship opportunity with agencies to help students to build network? I think we already answered this. Peter, feel free.
Okay, first of all, whatever Professor Andropoulos said and what Jenny mentioned, it did a great job describing the issues that we're facing, especially the faculty as well from an institutional point of view. But from my point of view as a student, I am aware that the ICJ, BA, and the MA program, they both offer internship courses, which are designed to expose the students to work in the field and including the application of their knowledge on human rights. But from my personal conversations with my peers who are graduates of both programs, many have expressed that the internship sites, they are overwhelmed with clerical duties and they do not really walk away with any substantive experiences that would land them a promising job in the ICJ field, which is a major problem. This has actually happened to me myself. I have went forward and asked for more work and did more work just to show my skills, because you know the clerical duties, it's nothing really that can help you in the future land a job. Also, a lot of students, some students actually, have been able to intern and work with Amnesty International, which is great. A few other students have had the chance to intern with Center for International Human Rights, which Professor Andropoulos is a director, but these opportunities are far and few. I think we need to do more for more students to get such opportunities, such as the Amnesty International, which is focused on ending human rights and violations across the globe. In this case, I would also recommend that the faculty, well, the institution, provide more information on where students can seek and apply and secure internships, as well as create like agreements with internship sites that no more than 20% of work can be clerical. So at least they get that 80% that they can really use in real life. This way, students can have a better opportunity to apply their knowledge on human rights, on criminal justice, on international criminal justice. The knowledge that they gain in the classroom, they can later on apply it in the workforce when they actually get a job. And as far as the question was concerned, I do believe that I've seen lists of the internship sites that John Jay has relationships with. The list is extensive, and I'm sure you can do better and create more partnerships. But also, students need to be more aware of these opportunities, because some opportunities are there, but you don't really know about it. So it's really important to bring it out there, to send emails repeatedly, to put flyers. I see that back before the coronavirus, there was quite a few flyers on the walls, but now we feel like we're more disconnected. So more emails would work, more posts on social media, which the ICJMA program is doing. I think whatever they can to share that information as much as they can, as freely as they can, so the student can share it among themselves. Maybe have alumni send out emails when the job site they're currently working on the field is looking for someone to hire, is looking for an internship, full-time, not a full-time, a paid internship or an unpaid internship, because the students also, well, depending on their situations, they need paid internships, which is a little more challenging than getting actually non-paid internships. So that's my point of view.
I would just like to add on that if I could, Jenny.
Sure, absolutely. Tatiana, go for it.
So I definitely just wanted to commend Dr. Walker Said, because you started a Facebook group chat. And I know that I was pulling a lot of that weight before you transitioned into the role, and just creating like a WhatsApp chat just to like have the group of the MA students and human rights just communicating about resources. But I think in the matter of like honing in on the alumni relations, that is really essential, just because we are working in the field in some capacity. And maybe that's a process of just having like a LinkedIn group chat where we're providing the resources that Peter had mentioned, but also building those partnerships. I think in the process, maybe like a mentorship program, that's also really essential. But it could be really difficult just because folks are really busy. So I understand that part. And also a little bit about just like students, I just want to speak to them because I understand more of the institution aspect, but for students that are looking for these opportunities, I think it's really wise for you to put in that work as well. So just a little bit about my experience, just going to these organizations like the UN, they have like the ECOSAT right now, the Youth Forum is currently going on. Apply and see if you can get in, see if you can become a delegate. They have the youth delegate organizations like the Friendship Ambassadors. They have programs where you can join there. There's a lot of youth activists that are doing the work currently where you can network with them. And then from there, you're also being able to gain the experience and learn about the work that they're doing abroad and also the work that they're currently doing here. Because it is really difficult to get into these international organizations and then not have any of the experience. And I do believe that currently in the program, when I was there, I wasn't getting all of that experience. I had to do a lot of that work outside of my program, outside of my classes. So thinking about your skills, thinking about research, all of that is needed, opposed to like the clerical, which you mentioned, Peter, which is not what you're wanting to do when you're in your your full-time job. So maybe honing in on those skills, I realized writing papers, like that was another thing when we first got into the class, a lot of people didn't have those skills. And you need those things when you're moving on into your full-time job. So I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but currently just having more partnerships with the organizations, yes, that is needed. And also relying and also honing in on the alumni relations. That is also essential because we are doing the work currently, being that we were the first people that graduated.
I'm definitely going to take up that advice for the LinkedIn group, for sure. LinkedIn is really the best professional networking site, much better than Facebook for sharing professional news, sharing promotions, sharing job opportunities or internships available. So I definitely want to start a LinkedIn group for current MA students and human rights MA graduates. I even think we might even want to join up with the International Criminal Justice MA and just try to have like a joint group, so that because we have so many overlapping interests between our two MA programs, it might be worthwhile to form like a joint LinkedIn alumni group. But I'm going to make that an initiative for the spring. Thank you, Tatiana. Really smart thought.
May I say something, Eugenia, on an issue that Peter raised? And it's an issue of concern on internships. And I speak from personal experience, not only when I try to individually place students, but from my experience when many years ago I was running an internship program for the whole CUNY system in international affairs. The problem that Peter identifies can be a serious problem, that you go to an agency and then you end up spending about 60, 70% of your time photocopying and preparing coffee for the boss. And in order to avoid that, what we did through the CUNY internship office at the Graduate Center that was running the program, make sure that in the written arrangement was stipulated that this internship is expected to be an internship that will provide an opportunity for the student to hone their analytical and writing skills and not their coffee making skills. For example, one of the things that I would say when I would contact is when, for example, the supervisor there will ask me, what kind of work would you envisage the internee that will bring here doing? I say just a couple of examples. You want to send somebody to listen to the debate that is taking place on the third committee of the General Assembly, which focuses on human rights and humanitarian affairs. Send my students to prepare a one-pager on the deliberations on that committee. That's a wonderful exercise because they forces the student to distill the main points from throughout the days and put them down on a page and a half for their supervisor. That's a very excellent exercise. Another one, you are preparing some kind of a meeting and you need some background research for a background note that will be circulated to all the participants in advance. Please get our students involved in this. So if we're to institutionalize that, that should be part of the agreement in writing in order to avoid the problem that Peter mentions, because this is a problem And again, speaking from personal experience, in internship placement that this did occur, and despite this agreement, the student came back and complained that was not doing, then I did not place any students again with that particular entity. So there are ways to go around and also to suggest, well, of course, it is up to the agency to decide how they are going to use their interns, but this does not prevent us, especially if we have an agreement, an institutional agreements to indicate, to highlight the type of work that we would like our interns to do.
I couldn't agree more, Professor. And we go back to the conversation of having this institutionalized. And it's important that we emphasize that, because when it's being institutionalized, there's less room for governmental or non-governmental agencies to place the student into meaningless clerical duties. There are not, because the students that are going, there are students that are of a certain level. They have an academic standing that it's sometimes is very high, and students work really hard to get to that standard. So when this whole process is being institutionalized, there's little to no room for misplacing the students in the duties. We are getting close to the end. So I would like to thank everyone again into committing your evening for this discussion. As I stated earlier, I do stay very committed into bringing this initiative into life to make this program better for the future generations that decide to join John Jay in ICJ and human rights major. Without any further ado, I think that all of the questions have been addressed in our live chat. Thank you so much for doing that. I do wish you all a great evening, and hopefully I'll get to see you very soon.